Hello folks, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to an episode of Paradigm Shift. Today's episode is entitled The Clash of Science and Religion. So I've been online quite a lot recently looking at debates between religious people and scientists. Now their kind of fundamental disagreement has brought about some very interesting points and raised some even more interesting questions. One of which has been troubling me quite a lot recently, which is why I'm making this video, to try and get some of your input towards boiling this question down further, reducing it to a state whereby it might be more easy to answer. So before I ask the question, let's take a look at this clash between science and religion. Now, I don't particularly like dichotomies. I don't like the idea that there are only two sides to an argument. So I'm splitting this clash into three realms. We have the realm of science, the realm of monotheism, which refers to religions such as Christianity and Islam, and the realm of Zen, which for the purposes of this talk will refer to Eastern philosophy. Now, I know that most of these debates are strictly between monotheism and science, but I do think that Eastern philosophy can help us in working towards some interesting answers and some interesting philosophical ideas. So let's take a brief look at each of these points of view and what they represent. Let's begin with science. So, science asks essentially two questions. We have the question of what and the question of how. Now, the question of what represents observation. So what have we observed? What can we see? What's out there? And the question of how represents explanation. How do we piece together the things that we've observed into a theory that makes sense for us, into something that we can use to predict future happenings? Now, there are some problems with science when it comes to explaining existence. The first one is that it doesn't really ask the question why. Why are the laws of physics the way that they are? You can ask why things happen to a scientist and get a good solid answer that often satisfies the question. If I was to ask why does fire happen when I strike a flint next to some kindling, a scientist would most likely refer to the fire triangle and tell me, well, if there is fuel present and there's enough heat and there's sufficient oxygen, then fire occurs. Now, I could ask, well, why does fire occur under these circumstances? And if they were a good scientist and they knew a thing or two about quantum mechanics or atomic physics, then they'd explain to me about the vibrations happening with the atoms and things like this. But still, they're just giving me a more refined observation, and they're still answering the questions of what and how, and not really addressing why the laws of physics are the way that they are. The next problem with science is that it doesn't at all address the question of intent. You can't ask science, was the creation of Earth intended to be so? Scientists at that point will say, hey, that's not our department, we don't do that. Talk to a philosopher, talk to, someone else. So the next realm entering this argument is the realm of monotheism, and as I mentioned earlier, monotheistic religions are those that believe in one God, so mono being one and theist being a believer. So essentially, monotheism is the belief that one single divine entity created everything. Now this addresses the question of why the fundamental laws of physics are the way that they are, and also attempts to answer this question. It also addresses the issue of intent with regards to the laws of physics. Although the problem with monotheism is that it holds a position of sacredness, if that's a word. If it's not a word, I've just invented a word, sacredness, sacredity, I'm not sure. But essentially, monotheism holds its position as sacred, which means that you have to accept it on faith. You are forbidden to question the validity of its claims, and God forbid you should ever ask the Bible to cite one of its references or provide an author name. Now that's a position that is almost impossible for a scientist to accept. It's a position that should be impossible for any reasonable or logical person to accept. And it's for this reason that there's such a fundamental disagreement between monotheism and science. So now at this point, I'd like to bring Zen Buddhism and Eastern philosophy into the argument and describe a little about what that represents. So Zen philosophy kind of turns science on its head in a way. So if we take a look at what the Western scientific view of what existence is, and we compare that to the Eastern view of what existence is, then we see a strikingly similar and yet opposite view from either side. So the Western scientific view is that existence contains the physical laws, and that these physical laws will dictate how things happen if they are given to other things, if they're given energy, and if they're given time. Now, it just so happens that in our universe, energy has propagated over time in such a way as to form stars. Now, the life of the star isn't permanent. Stars die, and when they die, they go boom, and they fling all of the elements that they've produced out into space. And then those elements will then clump back together to form the second generation of stars, which produce heavier, more exotic elements, and then they go boom, and they fling all of their new elements out into space. And then again, the cycle continues, the more heavy elements clump back together, and this time they form the third generation of stars that have solar systems. They have little rocks, planets and moons orbiting round them, and that's the kind of solar system that we live in. And within these solar systems, well, at least our solar system, the planets over time develop and become more complex, developing life. And then that life evolves into more advanced life, which gives rise to consciousness and ultimately the human experience. Now, Zen philosophy turns this whole flow upside down, and it begins with consciousness. And it says that consciousness observes the physical laws, it observes energy, and it happens over time. To give rise to our own personal experiences, and that it's this experience that is existence. And it tells us that nothing would exist if it wasn't experienced, and therefore consciousness is existence and experience, and it's all one, and we are it, and we are one with everything. Now, the problem with this is that you can't provide evidence to further explain it. It's just a perspective. It's a reality tunnel, as it's been described. And therefore, it's an introvert, internal, kind of unprovable thing. So, with each of these pursuits in mind, I would like to ask a question. And the question is as follows. Is existence a result of intent? Now, personally, I have no idea as to how we could possibly test for an answer to this question. However, in an attempt to get closer to the answer, I can turn it into a multiple choice question. And the choices are as follows. Number 1, no. There is no intent that guides what the fundamental laws of physics should be. It's all unintended. It's based on chance and rolling the dice an infinite number of times. Now, this option leans more towards the scientific view, and it does kind of lead my own brain to a bit of an unsettling circular logic, which is that things are the way they are because they are. You just get over it. And this I find somewhat unsettling. It doesn't necessarily make it less likely, it just doesn't feel good to believe. The second answer is yes, existence is a result of intent. However, the force that intended the laws of physics to be the way that they are didn't have complete control over existence and is more kind of surfing over a wave of possibility, able to influence the way that the laws of physics behave, but not necessarily in complete control of the outcome. Now, this could imply that God wanted water to boil at 120 degrees centigrade, but had to ultimately settle for 100 due to his lack of control. It could also imply that God originally set the laws of physical reality to be the way that they are, and then sort of let the program run, as it were. So this would make our God unable to control the chaotic outcomes that time produces. The next option is yes. Existence is a result of intent. This is the monotheistic view that there is a God who intended all of the laws of physics and the addition of energy and time to be exactly the way that they are, and that God has 100% control as to the outcome of everything that happens in existence. Option number 4 refers to the Eastern philosophy side of this argument, which is in a way avoiding the answer and is essentially saying that's a silly question, don't be silly, existence is consciousness, consciousness is existence, it's all one. Now this would imply that consciousness is the dictator of everything that happens in the universe, and that things only come into existence when they are experienced or observed. Now, this could lead us to redefine what an observation or an experience really is. When two things interact with each other in any way, even if it's just that their light has met each other, that could potentially be perceived as an observation or even an experience on a very fundamental and crude level, and that the human experience is just a very advanced form of this consciousness and this experience. So far we have 4 options as to the potential answer to this question. If you can think of any other options, I would love to hear them. And I will ask anybody who's viewing this video now, how can we possibly determine which of these outcomes is more or less likely and why? Now, I don't necessarily want to know which one of these outcomes you personally believe. That's not the question, and it's not really very important to me. What I want to know is, how do we determine the likelihood of these outcomes? So if you have any ideas, if you can think of an answer, if you can think of another alternative to this multiple choice question, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave some comments below or send me a message. That's all for now, and hopefully there'll be more of these in the future. Thank you.